And we're continuing with the 6th chapter of the second book of A Tale of Two Cities, which is called Hundreds of People. This is referring to the number of people Miss Pross says try to get in to see Lucy Manette. She and Mr. Lorry are visiting together. Mr. Lorry is asking about how Dr. Manette is doing and is starting to ask her if he knows the reason why he was kept away like he was. So we will pick up from there. Do you suppose, Mr. Lorry went on, with a laughing twinkle in his bright eye as it looked kindly on her, that Dr. Manette has any theory of his own, preserved through all these years, relative to the cause of his being so oppressed, perhaps even to the name of his oppressor? I don't suppose anything about it but what Ladybird tells me, and that is, that she thinks he has. Now, don't be angry at my asking all these questions, because I am a mere dull man of business, and you are a woman of business. Dull? Miss Pross inquired with placidity. Rather wishing his modest adjective away, Mr. Lorry replied, No, surely not. To return to business, it is not remarkable that Dr. Manette, unquestionably innocent of any crime, as we are well assured he is, should never touch upon that question. I will not say with me, though he had business relations with me many years ago, and we are now intimate, I will say with the fair daughter to whom he is so devotedly attached, and who is so devotedly attached to him. Believe me, Miss Pross, I don't approach the topic with you out of curiosity, but out of zealous interest. Well, to the best of my understanding, and bad's the best you'll tell me, said Miss Pross, softened by the tone of his apology, he is afraid of the whole subject. Afraid? It is plain enough, I should think, why he may be. It's a dreadful remembrance. Besides that, his loss of himself grew out of it, not knowing how he lost himself or how he recovered himself. He may never feel certain of not losing himself again. That alone wouldn't make the subject pleasant, I should think. It was a profounder remark than Mr. Lorry had looked for. True, he said, and fearful to reflect upon, yet a doubt lurks in my mind, Miss Pross, whether it is good for Dr. Manette to have that suppression always shut up within him. Indeed, it is this doubt and the uneasiness it sometimes causes me that has led me to our present confidence. Can't be helped, said Miss Pross, shaking her head. Touch that string and he instantly changes for the worse. Better leave it alone, in short. Must leave it alone, like or no. Sometimes he gets up in the dead of the night and will be heard by us overhead there, walking up and down in his room. Ladybird has learnt to know then that his mind is walking up and down in his old prison. She hurries to him, and they go on together, walking up and down until he is composed. But he never says a word of the true reason of his restlessness to her, and she finds it best not to hint at it to him. In silence they go walking up and down together, till her love and company have brought him to himself. Notwithstanding Miss Pross's denial of her own imagination, there was a perception of the pain of being monotonously haunted by one sad idea in her repetition of the phrase walking up and down, which testified to her possessing such a thing. The corner has been mentioned as a wonderful corner for echoes. It had begun to echo so resoundingly to the tread of coming feet that it seemed as though the very mention of that weary pacing to and fro had set it going. Here they are, said Miss Pross, rising to break up the conference. And now we shall have hundreds of people pretty soon. It was such a curious corner in its acoustical proprieties, such a peculiar ear of a place, that as Mr. Lorry stood at the open window, looking for the father and daughter whose steps he heard, he fancied they would never approach. Not only would the echoes die away, as though the steps had gone, but echoes of other steps that never came would be heard in their stead, and they would die away for good when they seemed close at hand. However, father and daughter did at last appear, and Miss Pross was ready at the street door to receive them. Miss Pross was a pleasant sight, albeit wild and red and grim, taking off her darling's bonnet when she came upstairs, and touching it up with the ends of her handkerchief, and blowing the dust off it, and folding her mantle ready for laying by, and smoothing her rich hair with as much pride as she could possibly have taken in her own hair if she had been the vainest and handsomest of women. Her darling was a pleasant sight, too, embracing her and thanking her and protesting against her taking so much trouble for her, which last she only dared to do playfully, or Miss Pross, sorely hurt, would have retired to her own chamber and cried. The doctor was a pleasant sight, too, looking on at them and telling Miss Pross how she spoilt Lucy, in accents and with eyes that had as much spoiling in them as Miss Pross had, and would have had more if it were possible. Mr. Lorry was a pleasant sight, too, beaming at all this in his little wig, and thanking his bachelor stars for having lighted him in his declining years to a home. But no hundreds of people came to see the sights, and Mr. Lorry looked in vain for the fulfillment of Miss Pross's prediction. Dinner time, and still no hundreds of people. In the arrangements of the little household, Miss Pross took charge of the lower regions, and always acquitted herself marvellously. Her dinners of a very modest quality were so well cooked, and so well served, and so neat in their contrivances, half English and half French, that nothing could be better, Miss Pross's friendship being of a thoroughly practical kind. She had ravaged Soho and the adjacent provinces in search of impoverished French, who, tempted by shillings and half-crowns, would impart culinary mysteries to her. From these decayed sons and daughters of Gaul she had acquired such wonderful arts that the woman and girl who formed the staff of domestics regarded her as quite a sorceress, or Cinderella's godmother, who would send out for a fowl, a rabbit, a vegetable, or two from the garden, and change them into anything she pleased. On Sundays, Miss Pross dined at the doctor's table, but on other days persisted in taking her meals at unknown periods either in the lower regions or in her own room on the second floor, a blue chamber which no one but her ladybird ever gained admittance. On this occasion Miss Pross, responding to Ladybird's pleasant face and pleasant efforts to please her, unbent exceedingly, so the dinner was very pleasant too. It was an oppressive day, and after dinner Lucy proposed that the wine should be carried out under the plane tree, and they should sit there in the air. As everything turned upon her and revolved about her, they went out under the plane tree, and she carried the wine down for the special benefit of Mr. Lorry. She had installed herself some time before as Mr. Lorry's cup-bearer, and while they sat under the plane tree talking, she kept his glass replenished. Mysterious backs and ends of houses peeped at them as they talked, and the plane tree whispered to them in its own way above their heads. Still, the hundreds of people did not present themselves. Mr. Darnay presented himself while they were sitting under the plane tree, but he was only one. Dr. Manette received him kindly, as did Lucy, but Miss Pross suddenly became afflicted with a twitching of the head and body, and retired into the house. She was not unfrequently the victim of this disorder, and she called it, in familiar conversation, a fit of the jerks. The doctor was in his best condition, and looked specially young. The resemblance between him and Lucy was very strong at such times, and as they sat side by side, she leaning on his shoulder and he resting his arm on the back of her chair, it was very agreeable to trace the likeness. He had been talking all day on many subjects, and with unusual vivacity. "Pray, Dr. Manette," said Mr. Darnay, as they sat under the plane tree, and he said it in the natural pursuit of the topic in hand, which happened to be the old buildings of London. "Have you seen much of the Tower?" "Lucy and I have been there, but only casually. We have seen enough of it to know that it teems with interest, little more." "I have been there, as you remember," said Darnay, with a smile, though reddening a little angrily. "In another character, and not in a character that gives facilities for seeing much of it. They told me a curious thing when I was there." "What was that?" Lucy asked. "In making some alterations, the workmen came upon an old dungeon, which had been for many years built up and forgotten, Every stone of its inner wall was covered with inscriptions which had been carved by prisoners, dates, names, complaints, and prayers. Upon a corner stone, in an angle of the wall, one prisoner, who seemed to have gone to execution, had cut as his last work 3 letters. They were done in the same very poor instrument, with the same very poor instrument, and hurriedly, with an unsteady hand. At first they were read as D-I-C, but on being more carefully examined, the last letter was found to be a G. There was no record of any prisoner with those initials, and many fruitless guesses were made what the name could have been. At length it was suggested that the letters were not initials, but the complete word dig. The floor was examined very carefully under the inscription, and in the earth beneath a stone or tile or some fragment of paving were found the ashes of a paper mingled with the ashes of a small leathern case or bag. What the unknown prisoner had written will never be read, but he had written something and hidden it away to keep from the gaoler. "My father!" exclaimed Lucy. You are ill!" He had suddenly started up with his hand to his head. His manner and look quite terrified them all. No, my dear, not ill. There are large drops of rain falling, and they made me start. We had better go in." He recovered himself almost instantly. Rain was really falling in large drops, and he showed the back of his hand with raindrops on it. But he said not a single word in reference to the discovery that had been told of, and as they went into the house, the business eye of Mr. Lorry either detected or fancied it detected on his face, as it turned toward Charles Darnay, the same singular look that had been upon it when it turned toward him in the passages of the courthouse. He recovered himself so quickly, however, that Mr. Lorry had doubts of his business eye. The arm of the golden giant in the hall was not more steady than he was when he stopped under it to remark to them that he was not yet proof against slight surprises, if he ever would be, and that the rain had startled him. Tea-time, and Miss Pross making tea with another fit of the jerks upon her, and yet no hundreds of people. Mr. Carton lounged in, but he made only 2. The night was so very sultry that although they sat with doors and windows open, they were overpowered by